The Zambesi River ran higher than I'd ever seen in my 15 years as a guide. 3 days of unexpected, torrential rain had transformed the usually manageable waterway into a churning monster, its banks overflowing into the surrounding savanna. This dramatic shift in the landscape was precisely why I'd brought my client, Marcus Thornfield, a wildlife photographer from Boston with more enthusiasm than experience, to this particular spot in Zimbabwe's Mada Pools National Park. The flooding will confuse the animals, I explained as we carefully navigated the Land Rover through increasingly muddy terrain. They'll be forced to cross at unfamiliar points. It could make for some unique photographic opportunities. Marcus nodded eagerly, his expensive camera already poised. He had hired me for a 2-week private safari, sparing no expense in his quest for portfolio-worthy shots. What neither of us expected was how this ordinary afternoon would transform into an event later scrutinized by wildlife experts across the globe. My name is James Kendrick. After serving in the British Army, I settled in Zimbabwe, turning my lifelong passion for African wildlife into a career guiding private safaris. I'd built a reputation for getting clients closer to animals than most guides would dare, not through recklessness, but through a deep understanding of animal behavior earned from thousands of hours of observation. We'd stopped the vehicle about 50 meters from the river's edge, using a cluster of acacia trees for cover. The afternoon light was perfect, that golden hour photographers chase, and we'd already spotted several elephants cautiously approaching the water upstream. Movement at 2 o'clock, I whispered, pointing toward a slight depression in the landscape. Marcus swiveled, raising his telephoto lens. Through my binoculars, I saw what had caught my attention, a pride of lions, looking notably agitated as they paced along the newly formed shoreline. I counted 6 lionesses and 1 magnificent male, his black-streaked mane identifying him as one I recognized. "That's Scar," I said quietly. "About 8 years old. He took over this pride roughly 3 years ago." "Scar?" Marcus asked, his eye not leaving the viewfinder. "The local guides named him. It means Scar in Shona. Look at his right flank when he turns." As if on cue, the lion shifted, revealing a long, pale scar running down his side, a battle wound from his takeover fight. The pride seemed stressed as we watched them move. "The floodwaters have cut off their usual crossing point," I observed. "They need to get to the other side, but lions aren't fond of swimming at the best of times." The Zambesian flood was far from the best of times. Debris rushed past in the current, branches, vegetation, even the occasional animal carcass. Any creature caught in that flow would struggle. "Will they find another way around?" Marcus asked. I was about to answer when Scar made his decision. Perhaps driven by hunger or territorial imperative, he began descending the slick bank toward the water. The lionesses watched, visibly hesitant. "He's going to try to cross," I said, surprised. "This isn't normal behavior, not with the water this high." Marcus's camera clicked rapidly as the lion waded in, his massive paws disappearing beneath the muddy surface. For a moment, it seemed he might succeed, his powerful shoulders cutting through the shallows. But then he reached the main channel, where the current grabbed him with invisible force. "He's in trouble," I said, watching as Scar began to struggle against the flow. The lion fought valiantly, but the current was relentless, sweeping him downstream. His head remained above water, but his movements grew frantic, uncoordinated. The lionesses paced the shore, vocalizing their distress, helpless to intervene. What happened next occurred with such speed that later, reviewing Marcus's photographs, we would need to reconstruct the sequence frame by frame. Without conscious thought, I was out of the vehicle, stripping off my khaki shirt as I ran toward the riverbank. "James, what the hell are you doing?" Marcus shouted behind me. I didn't answer. Professional training and personal judgment had dissolved before a primal imperative. I could not watch this magnificent creature drown without trying to help. The lionesses scattered as I approached, retreating a short distance but keeping their eyes fixed on me. Scar had managed to grab onto a partially submerged tree trunk, but the current was pushing him further from shore with each second. His efforts were visibly weakening. I reached the water's edge, my shirt gripped tightly in my hand. The rational part of my brain, the part that had kept me and my clients alive for 15 years in the bush, screamed warnings. Lions are apex predators. A drowning lion is a desperate predator. Interfering is against every principle of wildlife management. Yet I found myself wading into the shallows, stretching my shirt out like a rope. "Here!" I called, as if the lion could understand. "Grab on!" Scar's eyes locked with mine. In any other circumstance, predator and prey. But in this moment, simply two living creatures in a life-or-death situation. I inched closer, the water now at my waist, and flung one end of the twisted shirt toward him. By some miracle, or perhaps desperate instinct, his jaws clamped onto the fabric. I pulled, bracing my feet against the riverbed, using the shirt as a makeshift lifeline. The current fought me, threatening to pull us both into deeper water. For several heart-stopping moments, we remained locked in a stalemate, the river pulling Scar downstream, my desperate backward steps the only counterforce. Then, gradually, I felt the balance shift. Inch by excruciating inch, I guided him toward shallower water. When his paws finally found purchase on the riverbed, I backed away quickly, still holding the shirt between us like a tether. Scar dragged himself onto the bank, his massive body heaving with exhaustion. Water streamed from his matted fur as he collapsed on the muddy shore. I retreated further, suddenly acutely aware of my vulnerability. The lionesses had moved closer during the rescue, forming a loose semicircle. Their postures were alert but not aggressive. Yet Scar lay motionless except for the labored rise and fall of his ribs. Slowly, I backed toward the Land Rover, where Marcus stood with the door open, his expression a mixture of awe and terror. "Get in," he hissed urgently. "Right now." I didn't argue, sliding into the driver's seat without taking my eyes off the lions. Only when the door was closed did I allow myself to process what had just happened. "That was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever seen," Marcus said, his voice shaking slightly. "Probably both." My shirt remained on the ground near Scar, now just a sodden khaki rag. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as adrenaline ebbed, leaving cold reality in its wake. I had violated the most fundamental rule of wildlife guiding: never interfere. My actions, however well-intentioned, could cost me my license, my reputation, possibly even bring legal penalties for endangering a client. "We should go," Marcus suggested, glancing nervously at the lions. "Before they recover enough to see us as dinner." But I couldn't bring myself to start the engine. Something was happening with the lions, something I'd never witnessed in all my years in the bush. One of the lionesses, the largest, likely the alpha female, was approaching Scar. Her movements were cautious but purposeful. She nudged him gently with her muzzle, a behavior I recognized as concern. The male responded with a weak lift of his head. What followed was even more extraordinary. The lioness turned away from Scar and looked directly at our vehicle. Then, with deliberate steps, she walked to where my shirt lay on the ground. "She's going to rip it apart," Marcus whispered, camera raised again. But she didn't. Instead, she sniffed it thoroughly, then picked it up carefully in her jaws. And then, in a moment that would later be scrutinized by experts worldwide, she began walking directly toward our Land Rover. "Start the engine," Marcus urged, real fear edging his voice. "James, she's coming right at us." I raised my hand for silence, watching in disbelief as the lioness approached. She stopped about 15 feet from the vehicle, the shirt still hanging from her mouth. With ceremonial precision, she placed it on the ground, stepped back, and met my gaze through the windshield. In that moment, something passed between us, something that transcended the natural order of predator and prey, of wild and human. Something I still struggle to articulate. After several seconds that felt like an eternity, she turned and walked back to her pride, where Scar was now sitting up, recovering his strength. "Did that just happen?" Marcus asked, his voice barely audible. "Did she just return your shirt?" I couldn't answer. The implications of what we'd witnessed were too vast, too contrary to everything I thought I understood about these predators. What I didn't realize then was that this extraordinary encounter was only the beginning. The true shock, The moment that would challenge the foundations of wildlife behavior research and ultimately change the course of my life was still to come,